Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chuchu as a Ranker. And on this episode, we are going to be discussing the discography of the Australian/New Zealand soft rock and pop band Crowded House. Now, the band were formed in Australia by New Zealand native Neil Finn in 1985, who was bouncing back from the disillusion of his older brother Tim Finn's previous band Split Enz, which was a notable new wave act at the time, and one which Neil Finn ended up briefly leading after his older brother quit. Neil was joined in the original incarnation of Crowded House by Paul Hester on drums and Nick Seymour on bass, with his brother Tim coming and going at various times. The band recorded 4 studio albums between 1985 and 1996, before Neil ended the group due to the culmination of various stresses. In 2006, after the untimely suicide of drummer Paul Hester the year prior, the band reformed and have continued through a series of shifting lineups to the current day, recording 3 more studio albums. And as for my own fandom, well, there is none. Like, I knew a couple of radio hits such as Don't Dream It's Over and Weather With You, and I had also listened to one solitary album, their 4th LP, Together Alone, due to it being nominated and thus reviewed on a previous episode of Chuchu Reviews. But beyond that, everything else here is new for me. So, without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are the studio albums of Crowded House ranked from worst to best. So, we're going to be kicking off this list with the band's self-titled debut LP from 1986, which likely comes as a big surprise for those familiar with the band, as it's one of Crowded House's most iconic and successful releases. Indeed, the album went platinum in 4 different countries and spawned one of the most ubiquitous radio hits of the 1980s with Don't Dream It's Over. So credit where credit's due, the album made a lot of money and put the band on the map as one of the up-and-coming stars of FM radio rock and MOR. But it's not great. Like, the main issues I have here are twofold. Firstly is the production, which just absolutely sucks. This album has to fight an uphill battle against it every step of the way. The record has that super clean, super bland mid to late 80s digitized sheen, where every note sounds like it's been buffed and triple varnished. It's a type of slick sound that conspires to beat the personality out of the stronger tracks, let alone the weaker ones. Which brings me on to the second issue, which is the fact that the band are still growing into themselves, and there are definitely some embryonic and bland tunes standing shoulder to shoulder with the cuts that show off their potential. Tracks that probably need to be taken behind the bike shed and toughened up include the likes of Something So Strong, Can't Carry On and Tombstone, all of which are anodyne bits of throwaway soft rock bluster that are deeply castrated by that awful 1980s production style. World Where You Live falls victim to it too, and also to the fact that its spark-free composition makes it sound like bad Billy Joel. Well, Don't Dream It's Over is a track that I've just never liked. I mean, sure, it's famous as fuck, but it's also a bastion of overplayed, sentimental tacky crap. Go to them all! On the flip side, however, as I already intimated, there are tracks that neatly display the band's potential here too. Open and Mean to Me kicks things off with some glistening jangle pop, surprisingly shouty vocals and blasting horns. Now We're Getting Somewhere has some bouncing spangly guitar work that makes for an easy win. The horrendously titled Love You to the Day I Die saves itself from a severe choo-choo spanking by having a nice Britpop style churn of guitars in the chorus. I Walk Away is a good bit of anthemic soft rock with its radio friendly fist in the air chorus and gloriously booming 1980 drum fills delivering the goods. While That's What I Call Love has some cool fidgety guitar and might well be the only song on the album that actually benefits from that crap 80s production with its synth stabs and bass grooving disco rhythms. Still, not quite what I'd call love though, certainly not over entering a cage for the friendly Labradors with a smear of peanut butter on your cock. So yeah, this album is very much the proverbial mixed bag. The next entry on this list also falls into that same category, but the difference between the 2 bottom placings here is the production. That super bland 80s production does the band's debut album zero favours despite its regular flashes of strong songwriting. 3 stars. Next up, we have Time on Earth from 2007, which was the band's 5th LP and their comeback and reunion album after a decade away, as the original incarnation of the band split in 1996. Sadly, the reunion wasn't quite whole as the band's original drummer, Paul Hester, committed suicide in 2005, hanging himself from a tree in a park near his home in Melbourne, Australia after losing a long battle with depression. Thus, as you can well imagine, this reunion album is definitely not all sunshine and rainbows. The air of loss and grief hangs heavy over the record, with a good few songs fairly explicitly dealing with those feelings. And as usual with this kind of deeply tragic post-death album, you can't help but be mesmerised by the genuine pain that comes rolling off some of these tracks. But let's not get overly congratulatory here, as the album still isn't the home run that it could have and should have been. This record has some legitimate problems. Firstly and crucially, it's just way too long. 14 tracks spanning 58 minutes is just too much crowded house to handle in one sitting. And this is compounded by the second fault, which is that there's a whole bunch of subpar filler on this. Tracks like Heaven That I'm Making and Walking Her Way Down are rote mid-tempo numbers that are unappetizingly bland. Transit Lounge is an unnecessary bout of experimental fluff that adds precisely nothing to the LP, or even poor old Johnny Marr doesn't get away clean, with his co-written jangle pop tune, Even a Child, sounding like a default low-effort slice of tuneless fluff. But on the flip side, there's probably a pretty good 40-minute album in here somewhere, as the production on these songs is great and the best moments are pretty spectacular, and, as I already mentioned, steeped in tragedy and splintered emotions. My cherry picks would be Don't Stop Now, which balances sadness and catchiness well, with the track's rocking thump countered by a resigned, distant texture. Paul Monde is the sound of crowded house grieving for their fallen friend over a moving, Beatles-esque melodic ballad. Likewise, Silent House obviously deals with the tragic pain too, with its anthemically sad chorus reminding me of Feeder's comforting sound. English Trees is delightful with its gorgeous autumnal jangle and bittersweet emotional lilt, while closer People Are Like Suns salvages a late album slump with a blast of cathartic catchiness. So yeah, this album is another mixed bag. I mean, there's some good stuff on here, there's some bad stuff on here, it's overlong but it also has some goodwill buoying it up. A conflicted 3 stars. Next up we have Intriga from 2010, which was the band's 6th LP and second of the reunion era. And to be honest, there's not a whole heck of a lot to say about this one. It's basically Time on Earth Part 2. The production and style of songwriting remains much the same as their previous album. There's a bit less of a tragic gravitas here, obviously, and the album is mercifully shorter at 10 tracks and 40 minutes, but it's pretty much the same thing as before, just a bit more consistent in the quality department. Indeed, the only complaints I really have with this are twofold. Firstly, this album feels like the least important in the band's discography, perhaps owing to its similarity with Time on Earth. This is a real kind of late period, business as usual, footnote type of record. And secondly, while there aren't any outright bad songs on this, the last 2 tracks do take a notable step down in quality, thus the LP ends with a bit of a whimper rather than the preferable bang. But at least 8 out of the 10 tracks pass muster here, and much like Time on Earth, the production deserves a nod. It's rich and modern, it has a good amount of layering and background details, and just generally has a well-made indie rock flavour to it. Highlights on a solid release include Saturday Sun, which is a decent opening rocker with a growling bassline and a good production energy. Amsterdam has some distinctive guitar riffing and a dark, wiry hum to it. Falling Dove is a folk-tinged number that eventually sheds its skin and turns in a more rocking direction, acquiring an emotive vibe along the way. Isolation has a lovely set of dreamy arpeggiated guitar lines and a wilting sadness to it, while Twice If You're Lucky is a glorious pop tune that adds some pep to the tracklist without breaking the album's emotional heft. So yeah, I mean, this is never going to be anyone's favourite Crowded House LP, unless of course it is your favourite, in which case, what do I know? Very little is the answer to that question. Anyway, despite its minor stature within the band's catalogue, it's still an emotive and consistent addition to their discography. 3.5 stars. Coming in next, we have the band's most recent LP, Dreamers Are Waiting, which is the band's 7th album from 2021. And this is yet another comeback album, as 11 years had passed between the band's previous LP, Intriga, and this one. And this LP is very much a family affair, as Nick Finn drafts his 2 sons, Liam and Elroy, in to play guitar and drums respectively. And isn't that just wholesome? Isn't that so sweet? Isn't that so precious? It just makes me want to be a better man and do something worthwhile with my life, like housing 2 entire food truck doner kebabs while being absolutely munted at 3 AM before falling asleep in a puddle of my own sick outside the local Marks and Spencer's. Just inspiring stuff. Like, it'll be interesting to see what happens when the band break up due to substance abuse and too much hedonism on the road. Neil Finn, in case you're somehow accidentally watching this, I'm sorry, please don't have me killed. Anyway, what we have here is actually a pretty good album of mature and emotive songwriting, galvanised by a dream pop style of production that layers the tracks in reverb and effects, which in turn gives the record an ethereal and cohesive atmosphere. Highlights include Playing With Fire, which has a stomping beat to its lovely horn-laced upbeat pop rock. To the Island is great with its uncharacteristic melody and rhythmic pulse grabbing your attention. Show Me The Way has a super dreamy laid-back texture and a blossoming chorus that's smothered in Beach Boys style harmonised vocals. Good Night Everyone is an emotive ballad that's propelled by the album's ghostly soundscapes and distant synths, while Start of Something is a fantastic shoegazy pop tune that drips with a forlorn sadness and has a killer chorus to sing along with. As for complaints, there's not much to mention. I mean, there is one bland track on here in the form of Whatever You Want, not much of any interest going on that particular song, but the rest of this is pleasantly solid to good. So yeah, this is another inessential but highly enjoyable album from Crowded House, 3.5 stars. Next up, we have Temple of Low Men from 1988, which was the band's sophomore LP. And after the success of their debut album, the band stood in the position where they probably could have spun off down a plastic pop route, much like Aztec Camera chose to do on their third LP. But instead, Neil Finn chose to go the other way, making a somewhat challenging album of jangle rock that had a noticeably darker tone to it. And it works very well. All the components are working like clockwork on this release. The production, while still sounding very 80s, is markedly better than the debut. It's clean and clear, but without being overly bland. Lengthwise, it's been nailed perfectly, like 10 tracks, 38 minutes, that right there is the gold standard when it comes to album lengths in my opinion. And as for consistency, Temple of Low Men is probably the band's most consistent record overall. There aren't any low points on this, but, and here comes the one solitary fault that I'd level at this record, there aren't that many highs either. The entirety of this album just sits in the good range of quality. Like, it's never bad, it's never great, it's just good, you know, it's just like the definition of a solid and dependable album. So obviously picking high spots from it is a bit of a moot point, but my cherry picks would be Kill Eye, which seems to be begging forgiveness for past crimes committed, which is interesting. I mean, the only crime I can imagine Neil Finn committing is like not helping an old lady across the road. Although, wouldn't it be hilarious if Neil was actually secretly a complete douche in real life? Like the type of guy who names his dog Syndrome, just so when it jumps up he can shout, "Down, Syndrome!" Into Temptation is one of those mega lullaby ballads that Crowded House is just so damn good at, with its quiet verses launching into a sweet honey trap of a melodic chorus. Mansion in the Slums has a cool twitchy element, with its occasional flashes of horns and sinister guitars and backing vocals bringing some fun to the track. Sister Madly has an infectious rhythm, some cool jazz elements and a super catchy chorus, while Better Be Home Soon is a nice closing breakup ballad with an easy melody and some beautiful Hammond organ. So yeah, Temple of Low Men is a good album, like it's not groundbreaking or massively impressive, it's just a rock solid record of angst-tinged jangle pop. 4 stars. Next up we have Woodface from 1991, which was the band's third and easily most iconic LP. And initially this was supposed to be a Finn Brothers album, which was a side project that Neil and Tim Finn created and worked on together. But after the label rejected Neil's new clutch of crowded house tunes, which would eventually surface on the Afterglow compilation, Neil asked his brother if he could repurpose their co-written material, with Tim agreeing on the proviso that he would officially join the band as a full member. Although this arrangement would only last until about halfway through the album's tour, when Tim got bored and buggered off back home. But the sole album of full Finn Brothers cooperation under the Crowded House name is pretty great, but not perfect. In fact, in a lot of ways, Woodface is actually one of the most inconsistent records by the band. The highs on this are strikingly brilliant, but the lows represent the band at their most formulaic and forgettable. So let's be negative Nancy's and start with the bad stuff. Firstly, length, like 48 minutes and 15 tracks, if you count that fucking god-awful secret track I'm Still Here, is too long, especially with this specific record. I don't know exactly what it is with Woodface, but you really feel that over length here. The album is 48 minutes long, but it feels like it's at least an hour. And that's probably tied into the second point, which is the overabundance of anodyne, rote filler and the lopsided nature of the LP, as all the aforementioned forgettable material is located on the second side of the record. Tracks like Fame Is, As Sure As I Am, She Goes On and the closing How Will You Go are the type of songs that auto-delete themselves from your memory while you're still in the process of actually listening to them. They're just so ubiquitously bland that they don't register at all. I mean, the only positive thing I can muster up to say about them is that they're so bland that they're not terrible. They're just there, wasting your time, with the exception of the secret track, which is a puddle of blustery vomit. I mean, why is that there? Why? But the rest of the tracks on this are great. Indeed, this has a high proportion of the band's best ever songs on it. Christ, I could reel off 9 of the remaining tracks as absolutely essential Crowded House songs, but I'll rein it into my usual cherry picks or we'll be here all day. Opener Chocolate Cake is amazing with its hilarious rebuke of American culture and fun swaggering chorus. Fall at Your Feet is an utterly gorgeous sweeping ballad with a perfect hairs on the back of your neck standing to attention chorus. Weather With You is a jangle masterpiece. Its bridge is stronger than most bands' choruses, and just try to resist singing along with that chorus. It's impossible, you just can't do it. All together now. Everywhere you go. Four Seasons in One Day is another ridiculously good ballad with its stripped back folky soundscapes setting up the super melodic chorus perfectly. While There Goes God has a cool sarcastic sneer to its Americana tinged rock, although that chorus, There Goes God in sexy pants and a sausage dog. wait, what now? So you're saying that God is strutting down the road inside his sausage dog, literally fucking it in public view while wearing a pair of sexy pants? I must have dozed off in Sunday school for that particular fable. I officially petition for an 11th commandment. Thou shalt not covet one's pet for kinky sex. So yeah, I'm just scratching the surface of the good stuff there, not mentioning the romantic swell of the Paul Hester penned Italian pastic, or the rocking indie jangle of Tall Trees, or the Frank Sinatra vibes of the string-laden All I Ask seems like a bit of a sin. So now I've done my due diligence and I have mentioned them. All that's left to say is that despite its inconsistencies, the highs on Woodface are so high that they pretty much negate the album's faults, leaving this LP as an obviously essential Crowded House listen. 4.5 stars. So, here we are at the top of the mountain, and the Crowded House gold medal is going to go to their fourth LP, Together Alone, from 1993, which was the band's final album of their original run. And this record, generally speaking, is largely dismissed when talking about the discography of Crowded House. The critics are quick to lavish praise on Woodface or even the self-titled debut, but Together Alone is kind of treated a bit like a black sheep or an ugly duckling. And I just don't get it. I just don't understand how that's possible. In my opinion, this is Crowded House's best album by quite a large margin. I mean, as good as Woodface is, it's not even close for me. And what we have here is an excellently produced, emotionally salient, super consistent and incredibly catchy set of rock songs that have a good amount of sonic variety running through them. Indeed, this album has a lot more diversity in musical styles than the previous 3 records, and also a lot more in the way of rockist energy. I mean, there are actually a few cuts on this LP that genuinely rock out. In fact, the only negative thing I have to say about this album is that it has one solitary crap song in the form of Skin Feeling, which has an unappealingly dated industrial element to it. It just stinks of a track that's just trying too hard to be edgy or cool, and just ends up sounding half-baked and dumb. I mean, that sound just doesn't suit Crowded House at all. But everything else on this is gangbusters. Highlights from our highlight stuff banger include the opening, Cuddy Cuddy, which is named after the beach area where the band recorded the album. The track kicks things off with a lush, weeping soundscape that's drenched in slide guitars and ethereal atmospherics. In My Command is one of the band's best rough and tumble rockers, with a chorus that subverts things by pulling on your emotions. Nails in My Feet is a smooth dirge that nails a perfect tone of wilting sadness, but also takes the time to thread in some dramatic synth and guitar lines. Fingers of Love has a beautiful sash of distant atmospherics. But those lyrics, Fingers of Love moved down, oh wait, I already made my fingering a girl on her period joke on Chuchu reviews, damn it! It's oversights like that leave me seeing red. Locked Out is amazing with its upbeat grunge stomp imbued with an excellent emotive melody that gives the track a cathartic flourish. Private Universe is a gorgeous romantic dream pop ballad with a sea of tribal rhythms pulsing underneath the surface, while Distant Sun is a killer emotion heavy pop rock tune with a huge sing-along chorus and a kick-ass rocking build-up. So yeah, I mean, I'm just scratching the surface there. This album serves up banger after banger, and we'd be here all day if I were to detail the likes of the surprisingly heavy Black and White Boy, the Automatic for the People era REM jangle of Pineapple Head, or the lovely FM radio balladry of Catherine Reels. So I'll just stop there and say that this is a wonderful album that is endlessly entertaining. 5 stars. So now I've come to the end of my deep dive, the question remains, did I gain more appreciation for the artist? And the answer is yes. I really enjoyed this week spent in the company of Crowded House. The band's knack for crafting instantly appealing melodies makes them just so easy to listen to, even during their weakest moments. And that's it. That's my list. But of course that won't be your list, so why not sound off in the comment section and tell me how you'd rank these records? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Feel free to check out the Crowded House Spotify playlist that I personally curated, link in the description below. Make sure to take care of yourself, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.